Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
The 2025 NFL Draft is officially over, and 5 Virginia Tech players heard their name called, 2 of which came before Shedeur Sanders. We've got your official Virginia Tech NFL Draft recap right here on the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. We're recording on Monday, April 28th, 2025 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend. I'm your host, Riley Klaus. To my right is the managing editor of Tech Sideline, David Cunningham. Across the way is senior staff writer Andy Bitter. And producing the show behind the scenes, as always, is Mr. Nick Brown. Well, a lot of action is going on with tons of sports in Blacksburg, but we're going to start on the diamond, where softball defeated Cal this weekend out on the West Coast to improve to 39-8 on the season, total outscoring the Bears 20-7 off the back of Corey McMillan continuing her successful season. David, the Hokies seem to be back on the bubble of hosting a regional lately. Will they be hosting now? And if not, what more do they need to do?
Well, they got a big matchup this weekend coming up against number 7 Florida State, who's coming to town. I thought it was a good response by them, though. I mean, they lost their first series of the year at Pitt, go to the West Coast, which is, for those who have traveled out there, not easy. You got to deal with time change and everything, and they go out there and made it look seamless those first 2 games. I know they lost game 3. Sometimes you kind of just run into good pitching, but I thought they played pretty well. Corey McMillan continues to just tear it up. When she's homering on the 3rd pitch of the game, it makes it really, really difficult for opponents. I think they're in a good spot, but this series coming up, Florida State, it's kind of the tell-all.
Yeah, going to be really important. McMillan on the season, 25 home runs, 54 RBIs, and has only struck out 15 times. And you said it, that Florida State series is going to be pivotal. The Seminoles just dropped game 3 against Louisville, which makes it interesting this upcoming weekend. As we switch to baseball, they just dropped their 3rd consecutive ACC series after losing to FSU and UNC against Duke. And it was an eventful weekend, to say the least, as on Friday, Virginia Tech was walked off in the 11th inning, 6-3. Then why not play another 11? But this time they were able to come back from being down 7 runs, and they had a lot of help from Henry Cook, who had 2 homers. But Sunday, a 14-0 run rule defeat. Are the Hokies in a comfortable position to be in the NCAA tournament?
I think they are kind of teetering a little bit. I think they're going to be okay, but the tough part is that they haven't won a series in a while. I thought Friday they played okay. Saturday, it didn't start well. And then they have this miraculous comeback, largest ACC comeback ever by the Hokies. The fashion in which it happened was impressive. And then Sunday was kind of just a letdown. And that's what happens when you've got a freshman starter who doesn't go very long, and then it's a bullpen game the rest of the way. The Hokies need a bounce back. They need kind of a jolt of energy, a jolt of momentum. I know they're dealing with some injuries. They haven't been able to – they're kind of like – they're very, very close. They haven't been able to quite string together 2 games in a weekend in a while. If they can string together 2 games in a weekend and just win a series, I think that will get them over the hump. They're kind of there, but not quite.
Yeah. I've got a baseball take. I can chime in. This extensive research that I did since we started talking here, just looking up some of the projections in the field. This is before this past weekend. They still have Virginia Tech as a 2 in some of these regionals. Knoxville regional here is a 2, Arkansas regional in another one. So they need to turn around here. They've got Pitt coming up. Pitt's near the bottom of the ACC. I think they just need to hammer Pitt. I think that's what they need to do. And then Virginia in the final series just do well enough against the Cavaliers. But I mean, as of right now, they're probably still in the field. But I don't think you want to leave that to chance, especially with the way they put all these SEC teams. It seems like every single year going into this thing, it could be interesting coming down the stretch.
Yeah, need to be able to prove themselves over these last few weekends. Their next immediate matchup is going to be on Tuesday, hosting Liberty at 6 p.m. And now, before we dive into the meat and potatoes episodes of this podcast are going to hear about some of the support here at Tech Sideline. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. But today's podcast is also brought to you by the Hokie Way. At the Hokie Way, we work to support Virginia Tech, our student athletes, and the community that surrounds us. Together, we can create a win for us all. Learn more about our mission and how to get involved at thehokieway.org. Well, we mentioned in the intro, the NFL draft just occurred this weekend, and a lot was in the mix for Virginia Tech. But before we get into the Hokies, it started off relatively chalk, you could say, at least of who was selected, with Cam Ward, then Travis Hunter. But then the big story of the weekend, really as a whole, was Shedeur Sanders falling all the way to the 5th round.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess should say I'm not surprised, but I am surprised. I mean, you figure the way that these teams in the NFL just jump over themselves for quarterback talent. Like if there's a modicum of quarterback talent, they're going to take it and take that opportunity. I think a couple things factor into this. And no, I don't think it's some league-wide conspiracy. I mean, it's just ridiculous talk, some of these takes that are coming out in this thing. I think he was not a premier talent in this draft, and he carried himself as a premier talent, right? He, skipped the Senior Bowl, didn't throw at the Combine, didn't do anything there. Sort of from some of the reports at the Combine, his interviews did not go well, sort of an aloofness in some of those ways. I think, the NFL will tolerate that if you're a superstar. And if you're not a superstar, they won't. So, I mean, if Travis Hunter was doing all this stuff and it's the Heisman Trophy winner and a two-way player, I think teams would not bat an eye at it. They'd be like, all right, we'll put up with it. We'll do it. He wouldn't be the first like diva-ish cornerback in the league like that or wide receiver. I'm not saying he is. He seems to be the exact opposite. But if you're talking about a borderline quarterback that might not even be your starter, are you going to put up with all this drama and everything that goes along with this for a backup? I don't think so. So I think it got past, that people looked at him, they go, hey, we don't think he's a first rounder. And then if you're in the 2nd or 3rd round, you're like, why are we putting up with this attitude and this whole thing? And people are like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, Deion Sanders does it and it's different from when the Mannings do it. It's like, well, the Mannings were like consensus top of the draft guys, whereas Shedeur Sanders was not quite like that. So, and I see a lot of revisionist history that say, oh my gosh, nobody spoke badly about the Mannings when they tried to direct where he was going. It's like, I seem to remember them catching a lot of flack for trying to do that. So I think a lot of these takes coming out afterwards are kind of ridiculous. Mel Kiper was just losing his mind on the draft.
Bad.
Like just speaking with such certainty about these prospects with, there's a lot of variance. I mean, he was talking, he's like, oh, this is why the league's had a quarterback problem for 50 years. It's like, well, Mel, we can go down your greatest hits of busts like Jimmy Clausen and a bunch of other guys. Jamarcus Russell, all these guys you say are going to be great. Sometimes you just don't know. And that's the beauty of this thing. Now, Shedeur has an opportunity. He can go into Cleveland. He's got, a little bit less pressure on him, I would say, because he's not a number 1 draft pick. If you're number 3 pick in the draft or number 2, whatever, you're the franchise guy. You're going to be looked upon to turn that thing around. And now if you come in as a 5th rounder, I think there's a little bit pressure there, less pressure there. So perhaps a blessing in disguise. And, we'll see. I mean, the NFL is a true meritocracy. If you can play, there'll be a place for you. And if you can't, I mean, you'll be exposed here.
I did think it was interesting that he was the 2nd quarterback the Browns took. Right. Like the Browns took Dylan Gabriel before.
I don't know if the Browns know what they're doing necessarily. That was very weird.
They've got like a pretty stacked quarterback room. There's not like a
stacked
clear,
as in numbers.
Quantity.
Yes,
we're talking about
not like a clear. There's not like a
Deshaun Watson has a torn Achilles. Yeah. Joe Flacco's 89 years old. Kenny Pickett is more so not just good.
Like, that's a lot of guys in your quarterback.
Yeah,
somebody might be good.
But no, I think just like that was the story and of the weekend. ESPN spent so much time, last year at Colorado broadcasting games, or 2 years. What Deion is doing there is such a big story overall, and Shedeur became such this big story. I did find it interesting, that like Deion. This was back during the season. Like Deion, went after somebody on Twitter and was like, "My boy's going to be like a top 5 pick." It's like, I think everybody around him kind of overvalued his draft stock just a little too much. And you mentioned all Mel Kiper's greatest hits. I think it was one of those things where I think a lot of other people had kind of a good feel for where he was going to go, and it wasn't going to be in the first or second round. And I think after that, it's kind of just, well, who needs a quarterback and where do you want to take them? And if there's somebody of better value on the board, you're going to roll with them.
Well, that's part of the problem is the expectations, and those get set. It's these ridiculous, here's a mock draft for next year. So you don't even know what the teams are going to be. And all of a sudden you're mocking the draft, and that's how it gets out there that, he's going to be a top 5 guy. And his father did him no favors by hyping him up in that sense, retiring his number, ridiculous ceremony that they have going on there. I mean, when you set those expectations and then he goes into the combine and, frankly, I don't think he met with a lot of teams. You're already narrowing your field down. And then if you're off-putting to a couple, and I think there was a report about the Giants where they felt that he wasn't prepared when he came into that meeting. And then, they kind of pushed back a little bit on something, and then he pushed back on them, and that wasn't appreciated. I think you're limiting the places of teams that would draft you. And if it doesn't happen right away and then they don't do it again the next round, that's how you slide like that. So, I see a lot of people like, where was this when Johnny Manziel did it? Johnny Manziel was a disaster in the NFL, right? Like, the celebrity guy, and you kind of wondered how much of the football side of it is. To the best of my knowledge, Shedeur is an incredibly hard worker from what I've seen. Workout videos with Cam Ward, Kyron Drones is in that group too. All those guys working for the same guy. So maybe it's a different sense there, but this notion that like, oh my gosh, the NFL didn't have a problem with Johnny Manziel. It's like maybe they learned something from the Johnny Manziel, drama and everything that came along with that. Is maybe not the best thing to have this celebrity quarterback coming in ahead of time. How well is he going to do in the league? Johnny Manziel was out in 1 or 2 years. So,
well, Shedeur might be the next wearing number 2 on the Cleveland Browns, believe it or not. My last takeaway before getting into Virginia Tech, I thought it was really interesting. No first-round picks were traded going into Thursday. Yeah. And then we see as soon as the second pick that there was some movement. Were there any other big takeaways from the weekend?
I'm trying to think. I mean, the lack of quarterbacks in the first round was very surprising. It didn't feel like it was like a high-end draft. There were like 3 guys, and then it's like, okay, the 4th pick might as well be the 15th pick at this point. So I think that kind of limited some of the trading that you saw. Like, if we can get the same kind of talent at 20 versus what we could get at 7, why are we going to trade up? And that still didn't stop some teams from trading up. The Falcons are like, we'll trade up. They trade up like 20 spots with the Rams, who are like, we'll take next year's first-round pick gladly. So it was a strange draft in that sense. When you don't have a ton of those blue-chip guys at the top, I think that really affects everything. And we'll see how it plays out. Like I said, we're always wrong on the draft. We're always wrong on, who becomes a great player. We're so confident going in. This guy's a franchise cornerstone guy, and you see all these grades come out afterwards. A+. They did a great job. And then you look back in 4 or 5 years, you're like, that was completely wrong. Completely wrong. So as much as we want to say this is an exact science and how they evaluate these prospects, it's far from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into Virginia Tech. All 5 of the athletes drafted have actually been right here in this studio, but the first off the board was Bashal Tootin. He went in round 4 at pick number 104 to the Jaguars. He was the 7th running back taken in the draft, first for Virginia Tech since Khalil Herbert, and he gets to play alongside Trevor Lawrence and Travis Hunter, and he's in a backfield with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. How do you guys feel about him falling to the 4th round as that value?
Well, let that be a sign for future athletes of Virginia Tech. This is a kingmaker seat right here. If you sit here and interview with us, you will be drafted in the NFL. That's how it works, apparently. I think it's a good spot for Tootin. I mean, you look at the situation he's going into. New coach, Liam Cohen, offensive-minded guy. Looking to get some new weapons there. It sounds like Travis Etienne maybe is kind of on the outs there. I don't know the whole situation there, but they drafted 2 running backs in this draft. It was Tootin and then LaQuint Allen, I believe, in a little bit later in the draft. And those are actually, in my series that I've been doing with Tootin ahead of time, they're both from Jersey. So they kind of got to know each other at the Senior Bowl and stuff like that. I've not spoken to Tootin yet, and I will probably this week for the capper on that series, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But Liam Cohen, a guy who had worked with the Rams for a while, so that I think they know how to use offensive pieces. He's been in that Sean McVay system before. I think it's a good situation when you have an offensive-minded coach that knows how to use those kind of things, and he has the kind of speed that I think is going to show up. Maybe a little bit different from what they have in Tank Bigsby there, who I think more of a power guy. Mm-hmm. I don't know the Jaguars personnel that well, honestly, but I think with him, Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter, obviously on offense, they have some interesting offensive pieces that all of a sudden, let's see what they can do with them.
This is a good time to bump Andy's series with Tootin,
Yeah.
which I think has gone really, really well. I think that the interesting thing about Tootin is he's just so versatile, right? Like everybody's been talking about his straight line speed, and he obviously had great times at the combine and whatnot. But he's a guy who's a pretty good receiving back. He's a good running back. He can also return kicks if you need. I think he's a versatile weapon that brings a lot to Jacksonville, and pretty cool. He gets to play like alongside a guy like Travis Hunter. Trevor Lawrence is a pretty good quarterback. I think that's a good situation he fell into.
Annual trip to London too. You're always going to have that when you're with the Jaguars. I mean, it's, from a franchise standpoint, they've not really gotten their stuff together over the years. I think we can honestly say that. But, new regime coming in there. They've got a GM who's, 15 years old? Did you see him talking on all the shows? Yeah. What's his, James Gladstone? Yep. He was from the Rams, correct? So, I mean, they've got a new regime there, new coach, new GM. We'll see what they can do there. But it's probably, for Tootin, it's probably exciting to be part of that. Like something new, a new wave of guys coming in there, and they obviously have their vision. He was the first running back they drafted. So, they obviously liked him, and I think you saw some of the interviews with the GM afterwards. They targeted him. They go, man, we hope this guy's there on day 3, and sure enough, early on day 3, they snagged him.
First Tech player to go to the Jags since Ernest Wilford.
22 years.
22 years.
2003, 2004, I can't remember exactly. One of those years. So it's been a minute since somebody's gone to the Jags.
Feels like a strong landing spot, though, where he could make an impact right away. We talked about speed with him. You can talk about speed with Jalen Lane, who is the next Virginia Tech player to be selected, as he went to the Commanders later in the 4th round at pick 128. And it's not been incredibly long for Washington since they've had Virginia Tech guys. 6 Hokies selected by Washington since 2015. That's the most of any team in the league, and Lane feels like he could be a part of a fun offense.
Yeah, it's not only the guys taken, but like Logan Thomas has played there. I mean, a bunch of guys have gone through there. I think this is a very interesting spot, because I think the one thing you look at with Lane is you go, man, it just felt like Virginia Tech underused him. Right? I mean, the numbers weren't huge. This wasn't a big passing offense that they had. You saw some of the gadget stuff or stuff in the slot that he can do. He seems like a very versatile receiver. Now he goes to the Commanders in an offense with not only Jaden Daniels throwing him the ball, but Cliff Kingsbury calling the offensive plays. Like, you think he might be able to dial up some stuff for Jalen Lane to be interesting? I mean, they always have that sort of slot receiver. Was De'Ami Brown was on the team before? What's the Duke guy? I'm forgetting his name.
Crowder.
Jamison Crowder, that's his name. They always seem to have some guys that can do interesting stuff on that roster, and especially in the slot. I feel like Jalen Lane is perfect for that. And, obviously he brings a punt return aspect to the field as well. I mean, that's how you get on the field in the NFL, is being able to do multiple things and special team stuff. And so I think it's a good spot for Lane. I feel like we're going to say that on a lot of these guys. Good spot for him, a very good landing spot when you don't really know. But I think if there's an offensive mind in the NFL that can get the most out of Jalen Lane's skills, I think Cliff Kingsbury is it.
Yeah, I think it's a good quarterback situation for him. Like, Jaden Daniels just had a terrific year. He goes into it's a good time to be a player in Washington, I think. And I think I'm happy for him. He was one of my favorite people to interview from the last couple years' teams. I still remember we sat across from his dad on that plane back from Miami.
Yeah.
And that was after Jalen was like involved in the Hail Mary catch. We talked to Jalen's dad, and his family were down there for the game, and his dad was awesome. And he's got a great family, and I think, like Andy said, his ability to do so many different things is like he can. We saw him so many times on those reverses, and he mentioned, I believe it was to Kay Adams, that like one of his favorite receivers is Terry McLaurin, right? And so like he's around some really, really good talent on the offensive side of the ball, and he's a guy who, Andy touched on it. When Virginia Tech didn't necessarily have the best quarterback situation or most consistent quarterback situation, I was surprised a little bit. Like Stephen Gosnell stepped up and had a huge year. It always felt like, man, like Virginia Tech could use Jalen Lane in more ways. I'm hoping he gets an opportunity to shine, because it's like It felt like, again, he was underused a little bit. And I guess that's what happens when you have 4 pretty good wide receivers in one room together.
I'm older, so you guys might not remember this as vividly, but do you remember when Eddie Royal got to the NFL and then all of a sudden he's catching like 15 passes in a game? I was like, where does this come from? Because he just didn't have the production at Virginia Tech.
He didn't have
that
wide receiver room.
He was in a deep wide receiver room. They didn't pass the ball a whole lot. Then he got to the NFL and you go, man, this guy is really, really good. I wonder if you might see a little bit of that with Lane. Maybe not to that extent because they have other receivers, obviously, in Washington that they're going to use. But again, I just think this is a perfect situation. How interesting. Did you expect a couple years ago that Lane would be the first receiver taken of all those guys that they had?
I probably would have said second.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
the way that they talked about Ollie Jennings coming in.
I think there was so much hype around Jennings, and then he got hurt once big time and then twice a little bit.
Yeah, and then you look at Felton, just his size. You go, well, that's an NFL size.
Yeah.
But Lane, he had the quickness, he had the speed, and that matters in the NFL too.
I still remember when he committed, and one of the big clips Chris Coleman was talking about was Lane had that play where he burned Miami for Middle Tennessee, where he just caught it and took off, and he went the distance. And everybody
for Middle Tennessee did that in that game, to be fair. I'm just saying.
You saw that speed. And the other thing is, I think I saw the video, a really cool video the Commanders put out of the GM and head coach and everybody, Dan Quinn, talking to Lane like on the phone. And they said he was their number one returner option too. So if he can get an opportunity to return some punts, I mean, we saw it here. He housed that one against Marshall where it looked like nobody was getting out of there, and he kind of wriggled his way through there. So he's a really good player. And I think he's got the opportunity to help a team in so many different ways.
You talk about Shedeur and his attitude about like going in, and people are like, I don't know. Jalen is the opposite of that. He's the most enthusiastic guy. Every interview was always positive about everything. Never said a negative word about anything that I could recall ever. You could see a guy like Jalen going into the NFL Combine and coaches being like, I really like that guy. Just because you get a sense of what you don't want to draft some jerk on your team. You want to get a team of good guys like that. And I think Jalen's like that. And so that in addition to his skills, I think that helped him in this situation.
Yeah, that leadership can't be understated. And the Commanders, as we talked about, know how to use guys in different ways. They bring in Deebo Samuel. I wouldn't be surprised to see him work out a role in some way. We move ahead to the 6th round where the next pick was Dorian Strong, who just feels like the Bills' type of corner and continues the legacy of defensive backs being taken from Virginia Tech.
I have always thought Dorian was going to be a good NFL prospect. Just he seems to have that length. He obviously has the speed. I think maybe people look at the strength a little bit, but he's gotten stronger. He's gotten bigger since he got here. And I feel like it was pretty evident from when he first stepped on the field. And shoot, that was during the COVID season. Yeah. I believe he started right away.
He was a true freshman. Yeah, he started out of necessity.
And but he held his own when he was out there. I mean, he deserved to be on the field. That cornerback room wasn't what the cornerback room was last year, but he still got out there and played well. So I'm maybe a little surprised that he fell to the 6th round, but we'll see. We'll see what kind of situation he's walking into. I think he's got the kind of skill set that can succeed in the NFL. And, if you're going to bet on a position coming from Virginia Tech, it'd be defensive back, right? It's 31 guys that I think that have been drafted since 1997. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is a pretty good track record. And, that doesn't even include somebody like Brandon Faison, who's still in the NFL right now, I believe. Didn't get drafted and is playing there. So this place has produced NFL caliber defensive backs over and over and over. So there's something in the water here, or something in the way that they teach it, that they seem to do pretty well. So I like his chances. Also interesting, the only high school guy, or the only guy that was recruited by Virginia Tech out of high school to get drafted. The other 4 were transfers that got drafted.
And if you remember, he was a very underrated recruit.
He was. Nobody was all right. I think it was like Delaware State or something like that.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah,
I think it was Delaware State with Christian Darrisaw too, wasn't it? Like, man, Delaware State's like, these Hokies, dang it. They keep stealing all these guys from us.
I mean, that's a pretty good defense he's walking into in Buffalo. He's a guy who, Dorian, very much like Jalen Lane, just very humble guy. his dad is a bodybuilder, and I think he's learned. Nick's laughing back there, but his dad is jacked. But I think Dorian has learned a lot in the weight room from his dad, and he's just got a really, really good work ethic about the way he approaches things. And I still remember in 2021. So he starts in 2020 out of necessity because of COVID and whatnot, and there were a bunch of guys sick. And in 2021, he comes back. Was it 21 or 22? He broke his hand against West Virginia.
22 because it was Prize first year.
So he ends up being able to redshirt as a result. He played really well in 21. Can't play in 22. Bounces back in 23. Plays really, really well. I mean, he was one of the best corners in the entire country. And then I know it kind of took it a little bit of a dip this year, but I think what's one of those things where you play so well that like your numbers can't really go up anymore. I'm excited to see where he kind of fits in, and I think he's a guy, like Andy said, has a lot of opportunity in the NFL to kind of prove himself. He seems like he's always been a guy that's been NFL ready.
Let me issue a correction. It was Silas Janzi that was the Delaware State guy. Okay. Christian Darrisaw, Virginia Tech beat out Central Connecticut State, Morgan State, and North Carolina Central. The heavy hitters that they beat out for them.
Heavyweight right there. The theme for these last three, including Strong, is that they're going to really Super Bowl contending teams. Yeah. And as we transition to APR, Antoine Powell-Ryland, he was the first of back-to-back Hokies that we'll touch on here. He goes 6th round, pick 209 to the Philadelphia Eagles. And this is an interesting landing spot because the Eagles continue to always stock up on these edge guys. So will he get playing time right away? TBD, but he goes into a room where they've clearly developed talent.
You've got like the franchise situation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you go into the Super Bowl champs. They have a history of producing these kind of guys. I thought it was interesting with Powell-Ryland. He was neck and neck with Donovan Ezeraku all season in terms of sack total. And Ezeraku, I think, went in the 2nd round somewhere. Yeah. So maybe a little surprised that the APR fell to the 6th, but he's sort of in that tweener mold, I think. Maybe not quite as big as you want for a defensive end, maybe not quite as quick you want for an outside linebacker. So how do you fit him in? I would trust the Eagles that they know what they're doing in that situation. So even if it's not a you're going to play right away type of deal, you look at the track record and the history that they've had with pass rushers there. I think they know what they're looking for, and I think he's a guy who has a pretty good skill set. So can't hate the opportunity that he's walking into.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw some, I think it was whoever we quoted in the live draft blog we did. You wrote the quote about, I think, APR. I think that was it.
Probably Riddick, Louis Riddick.
Yeah, where
he had a bunch of great quotes. He had some great stuff to say about him.
I think the one knock, if you want to call it that, was that APR's in terms of the way he defends in the run game, maybe not his greatest strength, but I think the sack numbers he puts up, I mean, numbers are numbers, right? And he's really, really good at getting to the quarterback. He's got that really good swim move. You said it, Riley. Like, that is a team, a franchise in Philadelphia that knows how to get the best out of him. And I think, again, like, you look at all 5 of these guys drafted, all these guys are going to good situations. The one guy that's not going to a situation where they have won lately is Tootin, but they're kind of new look Jacksonville Jaguars, right? So I think this is a great landing spot for APR, and I'm sure Virginia Tech will be using that as the pitch from Virginia guys to come back home to the Commonwealth and play for Virginia Tech. A guy who is kind of using an outside linebacker role at Florida, and now he's going in the 6th round of the NFL draft after racking up like however many sacks it was, of 20 plus, I think, in two seasons. I mean, and he's a guy very, very humble too, and 7'5". So
yeah, a lot of production from him. And to round it out, last but not least, just one pick later, the Baltimore Ravens took defensive tackle Aeneas Peebles, who in his stint here in Blacksburg ends up seeing him being an NFL talent later.
Yeah, again, you can't hate the franchise you're going into. I mean, if there's one team that consistently crushes the draft, it's the Ravens. They seem to know what they're looking for. They draft it. They're smart about drafting positions. You look at their history on the defensive line, I would trust them in taking a defensive tackle. I think Peebles, from his social media presence, has a little chip on his shoulder at this point. I think it's safe to say. That probably fits into that Ravens defensive room pretty well. I think that's a team that goes out there and plays like it has a chip on its shoulder. So I'll say it again. I'm going to be like a broken record here. I'm sure I'll be wrong on some of these, but it seems like a good situation he's walking into. And 6th round, maybe you're not all as expected of you in that situation, but I think wasn't Chuck Clark a 6th round pick by the Ravens?
I believe so.
And he stepped in and he became a pretty good player and a starter. So they have a history with Virginia Tech, and it'd be interesting to see how he does there.
As a Ravens fan, I like this pick. Eric DaCosta knows how to get the best out of the draft, but that's a really good defense he's walking into. And I think one of the things with the Ravens is if you can produce up front, like they love guys who can get after the quarterback. And I mean, you're looking at Peebles and APR, 2 guys who they earned All-American honors this year in some regard, right? I mean, they're 2 really, really talented guys who went in the 6th round. I think in some ways they're steals for the Eagles and the Ravens. And one of the things that stands out to me about Peebles, and just in terms of his time here at Virginia Tech, he came in last spring, spring of 24, and he was spring defensive MVP like immediately. I think that kind of tells you like he's going to hit the ground running when he gets to Baltimore.
Yeah, a great opportunity there. That's the crop of draft picks. Of these 5, who do you think is most likely to have the best long-term NFL career?
Long term. Yeah, I'll probably go with Lane. Just because when you're talking long term with running backs, like somebody with Tootin, like what's long term in the NFL for a running back? It's tough to have a long sustained career with that. I just think Lane is going into a great situation, and I think just his versatility of skills and then just his ability to do a lot of stuff that works in the NFL. You've got to be able to wear a lot of hats. You got to be able to contribute in a lot of ways, including special teams. That's overlooked sometimes. I think he brings that. I like his attitude. I like his spot. So I'm going to go with Jalen.
I think I'd go Strong. I'd consider going Peebles, but I think Strong, it's one of those things as a cornerback, like if you can lock somebody down, if you can consistently produce, you're going to have a spot. What I forget how you said it earlier. It's like if you play well, in the NFL, like
it's a meritocracy.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, everybody's looking for an edge and a steal and, cheap players, to be quite honestly. When you're a draft pick, that's a real opportunity because you can build your roster out that way with pretty cheap talent. So it's always these, I always hear these sob stories after. It's like, oh, the NFL didn't like me or kept me out of this. If you can play, they will find a place for you. Like, look at this. Look at some of the stuff they look the other way on in the NFL. And they're like, that's not a great thing, but your talent is enough that we're going to overlook this and we're going to sign you. Like, I mean, shoot, how long was Antonio Brown in the NFL? And that guy lost his mind for a while there and seems to have now. So they will put up with a lot of stuff in the NFL if you have talent. So if you have talent and you're not bringing all that extra baggage to it and you bring it out there will be a spot on the roster for you and you'll be able to play.
Yeah. I think I really like Peebles. I just think he's been super consistent, and APR was a little. He'd have a 1-sack game here and then he'd have a 4-sack game there, right? But I think Peebles kind of just what you're going to get. Maybe not the most tackles, or maybe not the most sacks or TFLs, but he was just productive, and I think he's a guy who can go and have a productive career. And Dorian, I mean, if he can defend on an island, I think he'll be in a pretty good spot, and I think he's got a good understanding of. He can play both man and zone, and I think both of those guys have bright futures ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the crop of draftees. We are going to give some love to guys who were either received invites or were signed as undrafted. For our listeners, I'm going to rattle them all off here. Cole Nelson goes to the Bears. Peter Moore goes to the Colts. Caden Moore goes to the Titans. Parker Clements ends up with the Raiders. Keontae Jenkins ends up with the Bills. So does Steven Gosnell. Josh Fuga goes to the Chargers. Colin Schlee goes to the Commanders. Jalen Jones ends up with the Chargers as well. Quan Felton goes to the Giants. And Wilfred Panay goes to the Patriots. The maybe only shocker, we said his name earlier, is Ollie Jennings, yet has not seen a shot anywhere. Who on that list, is there anybody that could realistically make a roster and see an impact?
Well, I think I was gonna say, I think one of the most interesting things here for me is Peter Moore. I know, like special teams, people are like, "What?" Well, special teams is so unique in that, like, when we talk to Peter Moore at Pro Day, he's basically he's not like I know I'm not gonna get drafted, but that's kind of the mindset he has to have, right? It's, people don't draft punters. But he's talked with some guys like John Parker Romo, who's a former Hokie who's played in the NFL. He has a good relationship still, I think, with Brian Johnson, a guy who's been in and out of the NFL. Virginia Tech, special teams, a lot of kickers in the NFL. And I'm interested to see if he can go and make a roster. That's what he talked about at Pro Day, is I've got to go. It doesn't matter if the guy's been there for a really, really long time. I've got to go and beat him out. That's what I have to do. I think those wide receivers, Felton and Gosnell, those are guys who Felton's just uber athletic, and Gosnell just produces. I think, like, I would not be surprised if those guys just make a roster just in how they've been able to produce consistently, particularly in Gosnell's case. And Felton is just a kind of guy who he can be a big matchup problem. And he's another guy I think that Virginia Tech didn't necessarily use in many of those situations. Like, he wasn't a big red zone threat, but maybe it was more just because Virginia Tech didn't get to the red zone a ton.
Or this just didn't look in his direction when they were down there. I don't know. I think I look at this list, and one that interests me, I don't know how good of a shot I give him of making the roster, is Keontae Jenkins, just because kind of reminds me of Divine Diablo a little bit. Big safety, playing a linebacker spot, essentially a nickel spot in college. I think the move in the NFL is always get faster and maybe a little bit smaller, but faster. And I think they're looking at him as a linebacker in the pros or somebody who could cover the slot. And I think he's got that versatility that the defenses look for, that go, hey, we don't have to sub somebody out all the time. Yeah. They line up a quick, shifty wide receiver on us. He doesn't have to come off the field. He can stick with that person. They need to run support. He can do that as well. So, perhaps a guy to watch there. I don't know if he quite has the ceiling that Diablo has, but Diablo has been, a starter with the Raiders for a couple years now. So I think that's sort of the blueprint that you follow there, and perhaps they take a same look at him.
Right. We've seen that role work. Diablo just got a big contract in the offseason. I think he's going to Atlanta now, but that role, certainly you can carve it out there. In conclusion with all this, that is a lot of guys that either were drafted or signed to the league. What does that say about this coaching staff's ability to have an eye for guys that will end up playing at the next level?
Well, it says a lot about their ability to find guys. It doesn't say a lot about their ability to do something with it. I mean, I think that's the big takeaway from this, is 6 or 5 guys drafted and 6 wins last year. I think Maryland was like 5 guys drafted and 4 wins or something like that. Yeah. Whenever they did, it doesn't speak great about the job this coaching staff did with the talent that they brought in. And then, there's 2 parts of that. It's acquiring talent, as doing something with that talent. And I think the acquiring part was obviously an issue in the previous staff, especially near the end when you look at kind of the roster situation. But then you have to be able to do something with them once they get here. So I think that's sort of the issue right now with Pry, is he does all the off-field stuff in the off-season and shaking hands, kissing babies, getting the fan base excited about stuff, does a pretty good job of talent acquisition and convincing guys to stay, guys they want to stay, with the money that they have, and bringing in transfers that I think maybe sometimes overlook transfers, but fit the system and how they do it here. But how are they going to perform on the field? How are they going to get these guys in here and actually win some games? Because that's what fans want to see more than anything. They'd much rather see 10 wins than see 10 draft picks in the NFL draft the following spring. So that's sort of TBD with this whole situation. How are they going to do with the guys they bring in?
That's 16 guys, and that makes up almost a complete starting lineup on both sides of the ball, and you got Peter Moore there too, and you got 6 wins out of it. I think they've been able to identify talent, but the product, it has to be there. And I think a lot of people will probably look back on this as a missed opportunity this past season. Like, you've got so much good talent, especially in terms of your defensive line. I mean, that's a lot of defensive linemen that went. Your wide receiver group was obviously very talented. You had a very, very good running back. And you only got 6 wins out of it. And I think something didn't click. I think the staff did a really good job of selling these guys and bringing them in here. And think about how many of these guys are transfers. That there are a handful that were here and developed. A lot of the defensive linemen, Fuga, Penne, Nelson, those were guys who were recruited here and came in. But a handful of these guys are transfer portal guys. Mm-hmm. That means the staff went out and evaluated those guys the right way. And some of these guys played pretty well at Virginia Tech, but I think as a whole, the Hokies have to figure out how to translate the talent to success.
Most draft picks they've had since 2018. And that was a team coming off a 9-win season in 2017. So it feels like, underachieved quite a bit with this group.
Yeah, that kind of concludes that chapter in the past for those Hokies. But let's jump to the present, where there's a lot going on this spring, specifically in the transfer portal. There's good and bad news. We're going to start with the good for Virginia Tech. This past week, they've added some talent, and let's highlight a couple of guys. Starting on the defensive line, they bring in both Cody Heisman from North Dakota State, and just yesterday, Elijah Fall from Georgia Southern.
Is that how it's pronounced? Heisman?
Heisman.
Well,
Yes.
that's
Heisman.
fortuitous.
Heisman, and then Elijah.
Elijah Fall.
The Georgia Southern guy.
These feel like depth pieces here. I don't feel like anybody they brought in this spring window is like, oh, that guy's going to start and make a huge difference. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think most of these guys have. How many years does Heisman have left? Just one?
One.
Okay, he and Caleb Brown, I think, both have one coming in.
But Fall has two.
So, looking for depth piece and maybe some long-term stuff with these guys. But I don't know. I see this and I go, they're not displacing anybody in the starting lineup. Heisman at tackle. Maybe that's a sign that they don't feel comfortable with a fifth guy yet, or those backups maybe need to get a little bit more production there. But I think Copeland and Gilliam are pretty well set there. But then again, this is a new defense with new formations and new schemes and fronts that they're going to present. Maybe they were looking for something specific in that regard with what they want to do. I'm not really sure, but seems like a solid player they brought in Heisman. But I don't know if these are going to be like difference makers necessarily.
Yeah, I think. Both of those guys, at least, I think both of those guys, I believe, have nose tackle experience. So, like, if you see 3 down linemen, one of those guys is nose tackle. You've got 2 guys on here who have done that. Fall played pretty well at Georgia Southern. Heisman won 2 national championships at North Dakota State. These are guys who have some pretty good experience, albeit from a little bit of a lower level. Interested to see how it translates over, and that's 4 defensive tackles they've brought in this offseason with Arias Nash from Mercer and Jazari Priester from Hampton. That's a lot of new faces, and
there's an obsession with defensive line with this staff. They have like
JC's just like
they have
coveting.
So many defensive linemen in that room, and you mentioned this is probably a sign that they would like to get into some odd man fronts during the season. But man, I feel like they had 16 or 17 guys, and they're adding more on the defensive line. It's like there are other positions. I don't know if it's quite to the point where like when they had 10 running backs on the roster, it's like, what are you doing? 10 running backs on the roster. The limits are not as strict as they once were. So, there's a little bit more flexibility in that sense. But it just seems like every year it's like they're adding defensive linemen and defensive backs. And it's like those are the 2 places that Brent Pry is just focused on with hyper focus. Like it's very interesting.
Heisman's coming off a really good year, especially at the end of the year. And then Fall, he's a guy who played really well as a redshirt freshman 2 years ago. It was like a true freshman, like honorable mention All-American. Kind of interested when we get a chance to talk to Pry, just, like they've only added 4 guys in this spring window and 2 of them were defensive tackles. Obviously I think they saw something there. And, one of the guys, one of the risers, I guess, is Emmett Laws. Like he's kind of the next wave of guys they recruited out of high school. So a lot of mix of like different caliber guys, I think, in that room.
Laws is also a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
So he's never played. So, how much faith do you have him in going out there and doing it and performing to the level? If you can get a stopgap that can, bridge the gap between the seniors here and the next wave, I think that's sort of what you're looking at with these guys.
An interesting name dropped here, but yesterday when I was looking up how to say Elijah Fall's name, I learned that if he had an I at the end of his first name, he would actually have the same name as Taco Fall, the 7.5-foot center from UCF a few years ago, if you remember him. But you said 4 total additions. Let's flip to the offensive trenches, where another West Virginia Mountaineer has followed to join new offensive line coach Matt Moore, as Gavin Crawford has joined Virginia Tech.
Yeah, he's
big dude, 6'3", 330. I mean, I think this is just as simple as Matt Moore recruited him when he's following him here. I mean, he signed in. I incorrectly tweeted this. I thought he was a redshirt freshman. He was a true freshman. He hasn't even played yet. He just got there, signed in December, and I think goes through a spring ball and goes, I'd actually rather be with the coach that recruited me here. So you take linemen however you can get them. And clearly it was somebody that Matt Moore has scouted before, and he liked his abilities, and enough to recruit him to West Virginia. Makes sense to recruit him here if he's going to be the kind of system guy that you have here. So I don't know if that's necessarily an instant impact kind of guy. I mean, he's a true freshman coming in here, but clearly the staff there, Matt Moore liked him before. I think he's going to like him here too.
Yeah, he's a good counsel product from Maryland, that same high school as Kyle Altuner, who is another guy Matt Moore brought in. That's 4 West Virginia transfer offensive linemen. I don't, like Andy said, I don't know if I expect Crawford to make an impact, but you are seeing Moore's influence. Moore's getting more of his guys in there, and I guess it's kind of a 2 out, 1 in. We'll talk about 2 offensive linemen left in a second, among a handful of other guys. So that's more just kind of getting in his guys. I do find it interesting. You go to a school for a semester, like early enroll, go to a school for a semester, and then immediately transfer out. That's just what this has become.
It has, but you get recruited to a place by these coaches, and then you sign there, and then they're like, actually, those aren't your coaches. It's like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't, maybe didn't see eye to eye with the new staff. Maybe just really like Matt Moore. I mean, these position coaches have very good relationships with these guys. It's a big part of why they commit to these places. So if you have the opportunity to up and leave and follow and go to a place that you feel more comfortable, more power to them.
Yeah, it's. I did the same thing as Andy. I had to double and triple check. I was like, this guy hasn't played yet.
But you tweeted it correctly, whereas I tweeted incorrectly.
It was one of those first. I think it's just one of those first situations we've seen where a guy has basically spent the spring window one place as a true freshman and then transferred, and he's going to be a true freshman with 4 years of eligibility. So as far as Matt Moore building an offensive line goes, I think it's another good piece, and obviously Moore feels good about him because he recruited him originally.
Right. Last addition for here is the secondary, a corner, Caleb Brown from Hawaii, also added into this mix.
Yeah, I think that probably tells you a little bit about what's going on in the cornerback room. Josh Clark got hurt at the end of spring. We've heard it's not great with him. I think it might be something that could keep him out for part or all of the season. So I think you look at trying to bring in a veteran guy coming in as a depth piece to add to. I mean, Dante Lovett is the top cornerback right now, and he started 2 games. Thomas Williams started the bowl game, I think, and that was it. IBM is there, but he's sort of slotted in that nickel spot, which I think is a starting position on this defense. So if Clark is out for a while, I mean, I don't know that yet, but we've kind of heard some rumblings about it, and he obviously wasn't out there in the spring game. That's a hit to your depth, and you need somebody there. Christian Williams on that second team. Who else they have in the second group of corners? Anybody else? I'm forgetting somebody.
Yeah.
Those freshmen, JoJo Krim.
Oh, yes.
Guys like
Deloach.
that. Yeah, Deloach. So, Krim looked very good in the spring game. True freshman, though. Fifth-year senior versus a true freshman. Who are you going to want to have out there in certain spots? So, I don't think Brown comes in with incredible credentials or something like that, but he's played a lot of football, and sometimes that matters in these situations.
Yeah, I'm going back and looking at Andy's story. So he spent 2 years at Kennesaw State and a season at Butler Community College, and then played 2 years at Hawaii. I feel like Hawaii would be a pretty good place to go to college.
Yeah, no doubt.
You've been to Hawaii.
I have been there recently,
Yeah.
and it's fun for a week, I can imagine. If you're out there for a while, you do feel a little isolated, I would think. At least that's what people that have lived out there say. It's like, man, you were a long way from everything. You're kind of on this island, literally on an island out here. So maybe that played into it, and I think obviously NIL cash probably factored in as well, which is always the situation.
Yeah. He's a guy, 77.1 overall defensive grade on PFF in 2024. He's played in 23 games over 2 years with 43 tackles. So, he's a guy with experience. And, I mean, they brought in Isaiah Brown-Murray, and I think with what Sam Cephas wants to do, I think Brown-Murray just kind of fits the nickel role so well. And now it's kind of like, well, it'd be nice if we could go get a guy who just kind of fits what we need here. And it seems like Brown does exactly that.
Yeah, List does have one more year to maybe make his mark in Blacksburg here, but what goes up must come down. There have been a lot of departures for Virginia Tech as well in the spring window. Of note, some notable names are both Jordan and Jaden McDonald. Braylon Johnson has already committed to Wake Forest. And then in terms of playing time, perhaps most impactful is Bob Schick on the offensive line, which means Virginia Tech has to replace its whole O-line.
Yeah, I think I look at the outgoing transfers, and I don't think there was a starter in this group. If you're projecting out the offensive line,
Dobby Belfort not starting?
No, I don't think so. Schick was maybe the guy who had the best chance to start that group, but you looked at how they finished up the spring, and you've got Montavious Cunningham with the first group at right guard. I think Brody Meadows is in that mix if he was fully healthy. If you're Schick, you're maybe seventh in the offensive line pecking order. So, I see all this stuff. It's like he was a 2-year starter and he only gave up 1 sack. It's like, well, he was the lowest rated starter on that team over the last couple of years too. And it wasn't a great offensive line that they had. So maybe not the biggest loss that they have the way that some people are making this out to be. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on in that offensive line room? It's like, well, they have a new coach and they have a new mindset there and they brought in a bunch of new players. So overhaul there. Everybody else I feel like was sort of depth pieces or further down the depth chart. Maybe Nida might have been among those, but I think even he was third among the centers that they had there. And even if you look in the guard mix, he was probably not in the top 2 at either of those spots. The McDonald's, very limited playing time the last 2 years. I know if Chris was here, he'd rant and rave about Jaden McDonald not getting any playing time, but that's the direction they had gone. And you look at the backups in the spring game, it's Caleb Spencer and George Balance were the backups there and not McDonald. And they got another guy, Jordan Bass and Brett Clatterbaugh coming up the ranks. So it's like, where did he fit in that linebacking room? I think Jordan McDonald's sort of the same thing at defensive end. They had a bunch of younger guys that were pushing for more playing time. So, top to bottom in this transfers, nobody on there that I look at and go, man, they're going to miss that guy this year. Maybe Schick just from, you always like depth. You always like veteran guys on the offensive line, but, perhaps didn't fit in with the vision that Matt Moore had in that group.
Schick committed to Oklahoma State just this morning. The Braylon Johnson one I think is interesting just because his younger brother is going to be a true freshman linebacker starting this summer. I mean, and his dad's Lauren Johnson, right? I mean, that's a legacy at Virginia Tech. Webb Davidson is the other offensive lineman, a guy who wasn't really factoring in. Davy Belfort, the quarterback, which makes the quarterback room even younger. That just means you've got Kyron Jones, Pop Watson, and then 2 true freshmen.
But how different are those 2 true freshmen from Dobby, who didn't play at all last year? And always something's going to give. When you sign 2 freshman quarterbacks in a class like that, it maybe sends a signal to the next one up that, what do they think of me here? And obviously new coordinator coming in. Everybody has opinions about quarterbacks and how they're going to fit. So it'll be interesting to see at UCF. I think people are like, he's kind of built like Mackenzie Milton. It's like, well, Mackenzie Milton put up some stats now. Yeah. Let's not put undue expectations on someone like Davi going into UCF. But, they've succeeded with a guy similar in size like that spot. And also, Braylon Johnson, we always talk about, he's a legacy guy. He's been here. It feels like they never really knew what he was when he was here. He's a corner and he's a safety. He plays right away and then he redshirts the second year and now he's in the safety and they bring in 4 safeties. So, what they really think of him in that spot, I think it was just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it wasn't working out here. So it'll be interesting to see him, staying in the ACC like that just down the road. We'll play Virginia Tech coming up here at some point. Do they have him on the schedule this year? I can't remember.
Not this year, no.
Not this year, but at some point coming up, I'm sure they'll see Braylon Johnson again down the road.
It's funny. I was looking up. I went back through all the transcripts, and I was trying to find out when exactly did Braylon Johnson transition positions, and I went back to maybe it was the beginning of last fall, and Pry's like, yeah, he's playing both right now, and I feel like it's never a good thing.
Not a great
you're
sign.
Playing,
No.
when you're playing both. And because I'm in this chair, I'll bring up Cameron Fleming, a linebacker who is a former safety. As Chris would probably say that he was undersized, a safety who transitioned to linebacker who did not have the body frame to play linebacker. So.
No, I mean, you look at the pictures and you go, that's not a linebacker. Yeah. That's a safety at best. And they got rid of the star position in this new defense, and he was sort of in that mix a little bit. So again, a guy that they recruited to a previous defensive scheme that now, where do you fit in exactly? Not surprising to me that he entered the portal.
Yeah. So with all those additions and losses, where do you kind of see if any more improvement needs to be made, or internally as kind of the spots on the team that just need those holes filled?
Always need offensive linemen. I mean, it's a tough spot to fill through the portal, but I think any and all that they take is welcome, just because you got to get those numbers up. You have to have a healthy amount of guys that you can try to develop over time. Specific spots, it feels like they were looking for a veteran receiver still. I don't know if they'll add somebody like that at all. Maybe a linebacker option as well. I don't know how they feel about those backup linebackers there. And, honestly, even the starters still a little, questionable with their production over the years. I think they really like Caleb Woodson. Is this the time for Jaden Keller? It feels like every spring we hear, it's starting to come together. Things are coming together, and it never quite materializes in the fall. So we'll see how that plays out. But perhaps another option in the linebacker room. But it's not cheap to find guys right now, and it's not the deepest pool of top end talent that's out there, so we'll see what they can get.
Well, and one of the interesting parts, which you kind of wrote about, I think might have been last week, just about the NIL situation, the money situation right now, in terms of the House settlement has not been approved yet.
It doesn't look like it will be, out of the NCAA's own stubbornness. Yeah. Where the judge is like, hey, figure out these roster spots, grandfather and the man. They're like, no. And the judge is like, I'm a judge. Do you listen to what I'm saying? I'm presiding over your case. Like, make an effort to do that. Like, imagine that, the NCAA sticking its head in the sand and just ignoring a request and hoping that the problem resolves itself. It's like, no, you're in a court of law and the judge told you to do it. It's not a wise strategy to sit there and just say, we didn't do that. Like, I mean, they're threatening to throw the whole thing out and take it to into the court and actually do a case. That would not be a great outcome for the NCAA. They should probably get on this and figure out how to grandfather in some roster things.
Yeah, but I think it makes the money situation right now all the more interesting, because guys are just can go for extremely high amounts of money. And I think if you're a school out there right now, you don't necessarily have funds stored up, right? Like, you probably used a lot of, I forget how exactly you painted that picture in that story. It's kind of like you kind of only have so many funds left over because you spent all of the
Well, they were thinking the last hurrah was going to be basketball.
Correct.
Because they thought the House settlement would be passed, and then all the football window would be under these new, rules and regulations, and you have to go through a clearinghouse with NIL, and then it turned out not to be the case. So it's like, well, you still have more in the reserves here. You have to go back to double dip from some of these donors and try to pony up more money. It'll be interesting. I think the other part of it is, really what is out there in the spring portal all the time, and it doesn't feel like what it is in the winter portal, where there's top tier guys, obvious starters. They're going to be difference makers. The spring portal sort of feels like people that have gone through spring ball don't really feel comfortable about their spot on the roster, or if they're going to get any playing time. You're not necessarily looking at starting caliber players on that. So, I mean, look at last year's. It was, Curtis Perry flamed out here, did not work out well. Caleb Spencer, who's interesting depth piece, had some moments last year. Now he's a backup linebacker here. And Colin Schlee, who was brought in specifically to be a backup quarterback and ended up playing, I think, more than anybody anticipated last season. Those are not stars that they brought in the spring window. So I think it's tough this time of year to find guys that are really good. I think you're mostly looking to fill out depth and plug some holes where you don't feel like you have an injury and all of a sudden you're in real trouble in a certain spot.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what Andy talked about in terms of cornerback. You got to get a cornerback in. With Clark, you don't know how long, what his injury might be. So Yeah, I think I would probably expect maybe that the wide receiver I think is interesting. I know they've had, I think Chris has written about it a little bit. They've had, I think they put out some interests and they've had some guys maybe visit or something like that. So I think another wide receiver, because there's not a lot of experience in that room outside of a Donovan Green who's been banged up in his career. So that'd probably be the next position, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you can get a guy anywhere, I mean, clearly J.C. Price wants more defensive linemen still.
Yeah, we're talking about all this stuff. It's going to be defensive line and defensive back. That's all they're going to add.
Yeah. So Hokies football still active in the spring, and we're going to close out with Hokies basketball, as both the men's and women's squads have made some additions, starting with Mike Young's team. A unique add, if you will, in Antonio Dorn, a center from Germany, a 7-footer. This is an interesting role for him.
Yeah, I'm interested when I get a chance to talk to Mike Young, just how international recruiting works, because you're recruiting guys who, in many ways, have played a couple years in this case, he's played in essentially Germany's second league, right? He's going to turn 22 years in May. And yet he's going to be playing college basketball for a couple years. I spoke with somebody. It sounds like he's going to have 1 to 2 years left. He's not going to be a true freshman where he's got 4 years. Sounds like he's going to have 1 to 2. But that situation is still kind of being figured out. But he's a 7-footer. Everybody loves 7-footers. He's a guy who he played pretty well this past season in Germany's second division, Pro A, I believe it's called. I'm not going to pronounce the club he played for, but I think he averaged like 9 and 5, and he had a double-double, and he had 15 double-figure games. And I look at this guy as kind of a depth piece for the Hokies, where they've got guys in Toby Lawau and Amani Hansberry in the front court already. I think you hope this guy can come in at least early and just kind of be a consistent contributor, right? He didn't have to play a lot, but a guy who comes in can help you immediately, can provide some depth, say, hey, okay, you can take Amani Hansberry off the floor for 5 to 10 minutes, and this guy comes in and gives you a couple buckets and a couple rebounds. And I'm interested to see how his defense translates over, but and how he moves. Anytime you get a 7-footer, it's how well does this guy move? But certainly an interesting pickup. And I've heard that the Hokies could be in the market for another European player. So who knows? It's Mike Young still has a handful of roster spots to work with, and more additions will come certainly. But waking up Saturday morning and then the news rolls in to get a Germany guy, and it's like, I'm going to websites. I'm going to like Euro basketball websites that I didn't know existed, looking up information for this guy. So
you see this report that Virginia is like the favorite to land a German basketball player too, like a 6'11" guy.
Really?
It could be interesting if there's a 7-foot German on both the Virginia teams going forward.
Yeah. Commonwealth of Virginia going worldwide here. Quickly as well, in the departure category, he left a while ago, but Jaden Young switched his commitment from High Point to UNC. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do find it funny. I had to double check just to make sure. So his head coach at High Point, Alan Huss, left to go be basically the head coach in waiting at Creighton. So I think Jaden probably reconsidered his situation. If I'm trying to view that from the North Carolina point of view. And I don't know. Nick says the North Carolina fans are not happy. The thing about Jaden Young, he's just super, super inconsistent, right? He had some really great games this year. He dropped like 27, 28, 29 points. And then in the final game of the year, he was 0 of 13 from 3 against Cal, right? He's got some highs, he's got some lows. I'm happy for him though. He's a good kid, and his dream was to play at Carolina. Now you might be saying, well, a lot of people grew up a Carolina fan and dreaming of Carolina. He was on Tech Talk Live earlier this year, and he had a quote where his dad used to take him to Late Night with Roy, which was like North Carolina's kind of like tip-off thing before the season started, and his dad would tell him, you're going to play here eventually. You're going to play here, and he did play there. That was the game you covered. Tech last played in Chapel Hill. And he's got the opportunity to play for Carolina. So really cool moment for him. Interesting that Virginia Tech will see him at least once next year, probably in Chapel Hill. So that's going to be interesting. And I still expect the Hokies to pick up a wing to complement Jaden Shute, Tyler Johnson. But yes, when I saw that news, I had to like double, triple check, because good for him, but he landed at High Point originally. So it kind of makes you think maybe North Carolina a little bit desperate. I'm not really sure.
And on the women's side, Kyla Freelon added to the group, in a way a familiar face to Megan Duffy as she comes over from Texas Tech.
Yeah, she had like 7 and 6, and I think she had 7 points, 6 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block maybe, or in Texas Tech's win over Virginia Tech in the WBIT. I believe she comes with 1 year of eligibility remaining. She's 6'1". She's a really good natural rebounder, especially for being slightly undersized. And she's a track star of sorts. In high school, it was funny. I was texting with Nick Brown about this, going back and looking at some of her high school stuff. She was a state champion in the 300-meter hurdles in high school, a time that was like top 15 in the country. I think she factors in a lot of different ways. She's a bigger body, yet still quick and elusive and athletic. And Megan Duffy's talked about wanting to play a little bit more physical, a little bit more up-tempo. And I think she fits that bill. And she can score, and she can defend. She's a really good defender, and she can rebound. I know Virginia Tech fans are still clamoring, going, where are 6'5" players? Where are 6'4" players, right? Because everybody wants height. And maybe it'll come, but I think for now Freelon is a pretty good addition, just in terms of an experienced depth piece, somebody who can kind of come in and help you win. Not necessarily a starter, but somebody who will compete for a starting job, push those behind, or push those in those roles, and she adds a lot of athleticism. And if I'm Megan Duffy, I'm looking at this addition saying she's going to play good defense, she's going to rebound, she's going to get up and down the floor. That's how Megan Duffy wants to play. I think she's a good fit in that regard, and interested to kind of see how, like where she exactly fits. Because I don't know, she's not like a true 5 or a true 4. She provides some versatility for sure.
Yeah. Well, before we go, what can we expect to see coming up on TechSideline.com?
It's tough to tell this time of year. I am going to finish off that Bayshall Tootin series at some point. I have some feature stories saved up from the spring. Talked to a couple players. Tomas Rimac will be one of them they'll write at some point. Then we'll see. Spring meetings are coming up. We'll see what comes out of that with the ACC. I don't think it's nearly. I don't think we'll be going down there this year, because I don't feel like it's so existential, the issues facing the ACC, now that they've sorted out their lawsuit stuff. But I'm sure there'll be stuff that pops up over the next month that we can't anticipate right now.
We got a lot of baseball, softball stuff. Again, huge weekend for softball. I'm sure Carter Hill will have a Pete Demore podcast coming up this week at some point. Nick's whatever Pete wants to do. Yeah, whatever Pete wants to do, we do, is what Nick said. But that's a big series coming up. I'll try to get out for at least one of those games at Tech Softball Park. Should be pretty fun. Should be a great crowd, assuming the weather's good. Chris will have some stuff, I'm sure. We'll keep you updated, monitored on the transfer portal front for men's and women's basketball. And I will have a story coming up later. While we're sitting here recording, Megan Duffy officially hired a new strength and conditioning coach. I haven't heard exactly what happened, but I think Tech's kind of parted ways with Greg Warner, Coach G, longtime strength and conditioning coach, who was brought here under Kenny Brooks. And Lee Taylor is the new addition. So I'm going to have a story up on that later. He was most recently at Penn State and Kentucky. So some familiar faces with potentially Charnay Zoll-Norman, one of the assistants, and Jen Hoover, another assistant. So I'll have some stuff on that, and we'll keep you updated. There's going to be a bunch of, when we get to this point in the year, it's a lot of recruiting. Yeah, a lot of recruiting and a lot of roster management stuff. So we'll keep you posted on that front.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to all of that. Baseball will host Liberty on Tuesday at 6 p.m. And as David mentioned, a pivotal softball series with the top of the ACC really clashing here in Blacksburg. So for our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company, for Andy Bitter, David Cunningham, and Nick Brown, I'm Riley Klaus saying thank you and enjoy the rest of your week. This has been episode 421.